May 1944, Dover, England. Feldwebel Klaus Richter adjusted his Leica camera, squinting through the viewfinder of his Focke-Wulf 189 reconnaissance aircraft as it made its third pass over the southeastern English coastline. At 22,000 feet safely above British fighter patrols, the 27-year-old Luftwaffe photographer had developed an eye for detail that made him invaluable to German intelligence. What he saw that spring afternoon confirmed every intelligence report flooding into Berlin. Massive concentrations of Allied forces were assembling directly across from Pas de Calais. Through his lens, Richter catalogued an invasion force that made his hands tremble slightly on the camera controls. Hundreds of Sherman tanks arranged in perfect regimental formations across the Kentish countryside. Dozens of landing craft lined up in the Thames estuary like steel barracudas waiting to strike. Entire tent cities sprawling across fields near Dover, smoke rising from field kitchens feeding what must be tens of thousands of troops. Supply depots stacked with ammunition crates and fuel drums stretching to the horizon. "This is it," he transmitted to his navigator. "The Americans are coming to Calais, just as the Führer predicted." What Richter didn't know, what none of the German high command circling their maps in Berlin could have imagined, was that he was photographing the greatest illusion in military history. Those tanks crushing the spring grass were inflatable rubber. Those landing craft were plywood and canvas frames. Those massive supply depots contained empty crates, arranged for maximum visual impact. The invasion force assembling across from Calais was a phantom, a fiction so elaborate and so convincing that it would paralyze German decision-making for 7 critical weeks and change the course of World War II. The army Richter was photographing didn't exist. Its commander, however, was very real. Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr., the most feared Allied general in the German military, stood that afternoon inspecting his phantom legions with photographers carefully documenting every moment. The Germans believed Patton would never be wasted on a diversion. Where Patton went, the real invasion would follow. This was exactly what the Allies wanted them to believe. The operation was called Fortitude. Before it ended, it would involve thousands of intelligence officers, hundreds of double agents, entire fleets of rubber tanks, and a web of deception so intricate that Adolf Hitler himself would fall for it completely. The phantom army gathering in southeastern England would hold 2 entire German field armies in place, while Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, 150 miles to the southwest. German reserves that could have crushed the D-Day landings would sit uselessly in Pas de Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. This is the story of Operation Fortitude, the secret operation that fooled Hitler himself. It's about how a Spanish chicken farmer, inflatable tanks, and carefully orchestrated radio chatter convinced the most powerful military machine in Europe to defend the wrong beaches, and how that deception saved thousands of Allied lives and ensured the success of history's largest amphibious invasion. The seeds of fortitude were planted in November 1943 at the Tehran Conference, where the Big Three, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin, approved the outline of Operation Overlord, the long-awaited invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. Everyone in that room understood a fundamental truth. Overlord would succeed or fail based on a single factor: surprise. The problem was obvious. There were only a handful of places along the French coast where a massive amphibious invasion was feasible. The Germans knew this as well as the Allies did. Hitler had been fortifying the Atlantic Wall for years, pouring concrete and steel into bunkers, obstacles and defensive positions from Norway to Spain. Intelligence suggested the Germans expected the invasion at Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, barely 20 miles of water separating England from France. Military logic supported the German assumption. Calais offered the shortest sea crossing, minimizing exposure to weather and enemy action. It provided the most direct route to the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland. The area had 3 major ports, Dunkirk, Calais and Boulogne, essential for supplying a massive invasion force. The terrain beyond the beaches was ideal for mechanized warfare, open and relatively flat. Most significantly, Hitler himself was convinced Calais would be the target. He had planned to use the same route in reverse for Operation Sea Lion, the aborted German invasion of Britain in 1940. In the Führer's mind, no competent general would choose anywhere else. This German expectation became the foundation for Allied deception. As Churchill famously said, In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies. The bodyguard operation was given the codename Bodyguard, a piece of Churchill's dark humour. Under this umbrella fell multiple deception operations targeting different invasion points. Operation Vendetta suggested an invasion of southern France. Operation Ferdinand pointed to an attack through Spain. Operation Zeppelin threatened the Balkans. Operation Ironside hinted at landings in the Bay of Biscay. But the crown jewel was Operation Fortitude, split into two components. Fortitude North would convince the Germans that Allied forces were preparing to invade Norway from Scotland. Fortitude South would reinforce German expectations that the main invasion would strike Pas-de-Calais. Of these, Fortitude South would become the most elaborate and successful military deception in history. Planning began in earnest in December 1943 under the London Controlling Section, a secret group of Allied military officers tasked with coordinating deception operations. The initial plans were ambitious but flawed. They envisioned creating fictional troop build-ups and feeding false intelligence to German spies. But Colonel David Strangeways, head of Montgomery's Air Force deception staff, was deeply unimpressed. Strangeways understood something the original planners didn't. Effective deception wasn't about lying to the enemy. It was about confirming what they already believed while adding just enough real intelligence to make the fiction credible. The Germans already expected Calais. The deception didn't need to convince them. It needed to reinforce their conviction so strongly that even contradictory evidence wouldn't shake their faith. Strangeways rewrote Fortitude with a focus on creating a realistic threat. Not just phantom units on paper, but a complete narrative of an invasion force gathering, training, and preparing for the assault on Calais. Every element had to support this story. Radio traffic, agent reports, aerial reconnaissance, even prisoner interrogations had to paint a consistent picture. The centerpiece of Fortitude South was Operation Quicksilver, the creation of the first United States Army group, FUSAG. This Phantom Army group would supposedly consist of 11 divisions, a massive force larger than the British-Canadian 21st Army Group that would actually conduct the Normandy invasion. FUSAG's fictional order of battle included both real units temporarily stationed in southeastern England and completely fictional divisions that existed only in German intelligence files. The choice of FUSAG's commander was brilliant. George Patton had been relieved of command of the 7th Army in Sicily after slapping 2 soldiers hospitalized for combat fatigue. The incident had caused a public scandal, and Patton was temporarily unemployed, a humiliation for one of America's most accomplished generals. But the Germans didn't see it as genuine disgrace. They believed Patton was too valuable to be sidelined. German intelligence files on Patton were thick with respect bordering on fear. They had studied his campaigns in North Africa and Sicily. They knew his aggressive tactics, his ability to exploit breakthroughs, his talent for moving armoured forces with unprecedented speed. In the German assessment, Patton was the most dangerous Allied field commander. They were certain he would lead the invasion. Placing him in command of FUSAG made the Phantom Army instantly credible. Patton played his role perfectly. Throughout the spring of 1944, he made highly publicised visits to the FUSAG training areas in southeastern England. Photographers documented him inspecting troops, visiting bases, addressing formations. These images were carefully leaked through channels the Allies knew German intelligence monitored. Patton even gave a controversial speech at a women's club in Knutsford that resulted in another public relations scandal, further cementing his apparent disgrace while keeping him in the spotlight. The physical deception supporting FUSAG was ingenious in its simplicity. The Allies couldn't create actual tanks and landing craft in the quantities needed to simulate a massive invasion force. German reconnaissance flights, while increasingly rare due to Allied air superiority, still occasionally penetrated British airspace. What they photographed had to look convincing from 20,000 feet. Enter the inflatable tank. Made of rubberized canvas stretched over lightweight frames, these dummy vehicles could be inflated in minutes by small crews. From the air, they cast the right shadows, had the correct dimensions, and when arranged in proper tactical formations, were indistinguishable from real armour. The Allies produced hundreds of these inflatable Shermans, positioning them in fields across Kent and East Anglia. Landing craft presented a different challenge. Full-scale dummy vessels nicknamed Big Bobs were constructed from wood and canvas. These floating decoys were anchored in harbours and estuaries where German reconnaissance would spot them. At night, crews moved them slightly to simulate the constant activity of a real invasion fleet preparing for departure. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Close inspection would reveal the deception, but from the altitude German aircraft operated at, they appeared genuine. Temporary buildings sprang up across southeastern England. Mess halls, headquarters structures, ammunition dumps and fuel depots were constructed specifically for aerial reconnaissance to photograph. These weren't elaborate buildings. They were simple wooden frames covered with canvas or corrugated metal, but arranged in patterns that matched actual military camps. Smoke generators created the appearance of field kitchens feeding thousands of troops, but the Germans couldn't fly reconnaissance missions regularly enough to rely on aerial photography alone. The vast majority of Fortitude's effectiveness came from two other sources: signals intelligence and human intelligence. This is where the operation became truly sophisticated. The radio deception was masterful in its complexity. Every military unit generates enormous amounts of radio traffic: orders, status reports, logistics coordination, tactical communications, all transmitted via wireless sets that enemy intelligence services monitored constantly. The Germans had become expert at radio traffic analysis, building profiles of Allied units based on transmission patterns, frequencies, call signs, and communication volumes. The Quicksilver Deception team created an 8-inch thick book of scripted radio transmissions for FUSAG. These weren't random broadcasts. They were carefully crafted messages reflecting the realistic activity of an army group preparing for invasion. Supply officers requesting bridging equipment, quartermaster units coordinating ration deliveries, medical units reporting readiness, engineer battalions discussing beach obstacle clearance procedures, artillery officers conducting radio range tests. Special radio units transmitted this scripted traffic according to precise schedules. As fictional FUSAG units supposedly arrived in England, appropriate radio activity appeared. When units moved to new locations, their radio signatures moved with them. The transmissions included realistic mistakes, requests for clarification, weather reports, even personal messages that added human texture to the Phantom Army. German signals intelligence units monitoring these transmissions had no reason to doubt their authenticity. The traffic patterns matched those of real military units. The communication volumes were appropriate for formations of the indicated size. The technical characteristics, frequency usage, encryption methods, transmission times, all aligned with established Allied practices. But the most devastating element of Fortitude South wasn't rubber tanks or radio deception. It was the double agents. And the star of this intelligence theatre was a Spanish chicken farmer who had become the greatest double agent of World War II. Juan Pujol Garcia was born in Barcelona in 1912 into a family of moderate means and liberal politics. The Spanish Civil War radicalized him, not toward any ideology, but against all totalitarianism. He fought reluctantly for both sides, later claiming he never fired a shot for either. The experience left him with a burning hatred of fascism and a determination to fight Hitler's Germany however he could. In 1941, Pujol approached the British embassy in Madrid 3 times, offering to spy for Britain against Germany. Each time he was rejected. The British had no use for an untrained Spanish civilian with no connections and no obvious value. Pujol, however, was not easily discouraged. If Britain wouldn't recruit him as an agent, he would become a double agent instead. Pujol created a fake identity as a fanatically pro-Nazi Spanish official with diplomatic access. He approached German intelligence, the Abwehr, offering to travel to Britain and establish an espionage network. The Germans, always eager for agents in Britain, accepted. They provided him with money, invisible ink, a cover address in Lisbon for correspondence, and instructions to recruit sub-agents. Instead of going to Britain, Pujol went to Lisbon and began one of the most audacious deceptions in intelligence history. Using a tourist guidebook to England, public library resources, newsreels, and a Portuguese shipping schedule, he began fabricating intelligence reports about Britain and sending them to his German handlers. His early reports were riddled with errors that should have exposed him immediately. He confused currency values, got British geography wrong, reported military units in impossible locations. But the Germans were so starved for intelligence from Britain that they overlooked the mistakes. Pujol had an instinct for what his handlers wanted to hear, and he learned quickly. He invented fictional sub-agents to explain his mistakes. When a report proved inaccurate, he blamed it on an unreliable informant. He created elaborate backstories for these phantom operatives. a Venezuelan living in Glasgow who hated the British, a Portuguese commercial traveller with access to military facilities, a Welsh nationalist bitter about English oppression. Soon Pujol was running an entirely fictional spy network, all from his apartment in Lisbon, none of his agents actually existing. The operation that finally got British attention involved a fictional convoy. Pujol reported seeing preparations for a large convoy assembling in Scottish ports, providing specific details about ship types, apparent destinations, and cargo. The Germans took the report seriously enough to divert naval resources to hunt for this convoy. When British intelligence noticed German U-boats searching for a convoy that didn't exist, they began investigating the source of the German intelligence. The trail led to Pujol. British intelligence was simultaneously impressed and concerned. This untrained amateur had convinced German intelligence he was a valuable asset, while operating entirely through fabrication. If he could fool the Germans that effectively as a solo operator, what could he accomplish with proper support? In April 1942, Pujol was finally brought to Britain. MI5, British counterintelligence, gave him the codename Garbo after Greta Garbo, the actress, because he was the best actor in the world. He was paired with a handler, Tomás Harris, a Spanish-speaking MI5 officer who would become his partner in creating the most successful intelligence deception of the war. Together, Pujol and Harris expanded the fictional spy network to 27 agents. Each had detailed backstories, personalities, and specialties. There was Agent 4, a Gibraltarian waiter working in an officer's mess. Agent 7-3, an Indian NCO with communist sympathies. Agent 7-2, a seaman with access to shipping information. The network included a military officer, several railway workers, an airline employee, a commercial traveller, and assorted other characters, all entirely fictional. The Germans paid for this network, sending Pujol substantial sums to fund his agents' activities. By 1944, German intelligence was spending approximately $340,000 annually, nearly $7 million in today's currency, supporting operations that existed entirely in Pujol's imagination. The Abwehr considered him their most valuable agent in Britain. Pujol and Harris didn't just send false information. Their strategy was more sophisticated. They sent vast quantities of information, most of it true but militarily useless, mixed with precisely delayed intelligence and carefully crafted lies. The sheer volume overwhelmed German intelligence analysts. According to British assessment, the flood of reports from Pujol's network was so extensive that German intelligence stopped attempting to recruit additional agents in Britain. Why bother when Garbo's network already covered everything? The true intelligence had to be accurate enough to maintain Pujol's credibility. Before Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942, Pujol sent his handlers detailed information about convoy movements in the Mediterranean. The letter was postmarked before the landings, but deliberately delayed so it arrived too late to be militarily useful. The Germans responded with apologies for the postal delay and praise for his excellent intelligence. Pujol's credibility was established. When D-Day approached, Pujol's network became the primary channel for Fortitude South deception. Between January and June 1944, Pujol sent over 500 radio messages to his German handlers, sometimes more than 20 in a single day. His agents reported seeing Fusag units throughout southeastern England. They provided details of unit insignia, officer names, vehicle markings, all carefully crafted to build the fiction of a massive invasion force preparing to strike Calais. Pujol's reports didn't claim direct knowledge of invasion plans. That would have been suspicious. Instead, his agents reported fragments of information that German intelligence had to piece together. A railway worker noticed American troops with specific shoulder patches boarding trains. A dock worker mentioned seeing landing craft being modified for rough seas. An officer's waiter overheard conversation about beach gradients at Calais. Each report was individually credible and collectively devastating. The genius of Pujol's deception was its foundation in German expectations. Hitler already believed the invasion would target Calais. Pujol's intelligence confirmed this belief through hundreds of small observations that seemed to come from independent sources. German intelligence didn't realize all these sources ultimately traced to one man in London. But Pujol wasn't working alone. The double-cross system, run by the 20 Committee, so called because the Roman numerals XX formed a double cross, had turned virtually every German agent in Britain. When German spies parachuted into Britain or arrived by submarine, MI5 was usually waiting. Captured agents faced a choice: cooperate or face execution. Most chose cooperation. By 1944, German intelligence believed they had dozens of agents operating in Britain. In reality, MI5 controlled all of them. Every report Berlin received from their British spy network was written or approved by British intelligence. This gave the Allies an unprecedented advantage. They could see exactly what intelligence the Germans were receiving and calibrate their deception accordingly. The double agents reinforced each other's reports. When Garbo's agents reported FUSAG activity in Kent, other turned agents confirmed similar observations. When one agent reported seeing General Patton in Dover, another independently mentioned the same sighting. The consistency across multiple sources, all secretly, controlled by MI5, made the deception nearly unshakable. Among the other notable double agents was Brutus, Roman Czerniawski, a Polish Air Force officer who had run a genuine resistance network in France, before being captured and turned by the Germans. Czerniawski had then genuinely turned on the Germans, offering his services to British intelligence. His reports from Britain, filtered through MI5, added a military expert's perspective to the flood of intelligence about FUSAG. Tricycle, Duško Popov, was a Serbian playboy recruited by German intelligence, who immediately contacted the British. His access to high society and business circles allowed him to report on economic preparations for invasion. Treasure, Lily Sergeyev, a French national, provided reports from a woman's perspective, discussing civilian reactions to American troops and social observations that added texture to the deception. The orchestration required to manage this network of double agents was extraordinary. Every message had to be coordinated to avoid contradictions. Real military activities had to be reported accurately to maintain agent credibility, but filtered through careful misdirection. Fictional FUSAG activities had to be reported consistently across multiple agents, without obvious coordination that might alert German counterintelligence. British intelligence could monitor the effectiveness of their deception through Ultra, the intelligence derived from breaking German Enigma codes. Every message the double agent sent to Germany was encrypted and transmitted by the Germans to their various intelligence headquarters. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepted and decrypted these transmissions, allowing Allied intelligence to read German assessments in near real time. This created a closed intelligence loop of devastating effectiveness. The Allies fed deception to German agents. The Germans transmitted reports to Berlin, believing them secure. The British decrypted German transmissions and read Berlin's analysis. When German intelligence requested specific information, the British saw the request and could respond through their double agents with precisely calibrated answers. One decrypted Japanese transmission provided extraordinary confirmation of Fortitude's success. Hiroshi Oshima, the Japanese ambassador to Germany, had a meeting with Hitler on May 27, 1944. Oshima subsequently reported the conversation to Tokyo via encrypted transmission. The British intercepted and decrypted this message, reading Hitler's own strategic assessment. Hitler told Oshima he expected the Allies to launch diversionary attacks in Norway and the Mediterranean, but the main invasion would strike Calais with a force under Patton's command. The Führer was so certain of this that he had positioned his strongest reserves to defend against it. Normandy, Hitler believed, was too obvious, too well defended, too far from Germany's industrial centre. No competent commander would choose Normandy when Calais offered so many advantages. Reading Hitler's words, Allied commanders knew Fortitude had succeeded beyond their most optimistic expectations. The most powerful man in Germany had been completely deceived. The question now was whether the deception could be maintained through the actual invasion. D-Day, June 6, 1944, tested Fortitude to its limits. At 3:00 a.m. on the morning of the invasion, with Allied paratroopers already on the ground in Normandy, Pujol attempted to send an urgent message to his German handlers. He had pieced together information from his agents suggesting an imminent invasion. The message was carefully crafted to seem like a last-minute warning, while actually arriving too late to affect German response. But the German radio operators in Madrid weren't monitoring their equipment. They had gone to bed. Pujol's urgent transmission went unanswered. When the operators finally responded at 8 a.m., 2 hours after the Normandy landings had begun, Pujol was furious. Not because the deception had failed, but because his reaction had to be genuine for his cover to hold. He sent a blistering message to his handlers: "I cannot accept excuses or negligence. Were it not for my ideals, I would abandon the work." The anger was calculated theatre, but it served multiple purposes. It demonstrated Pujol's supposed dedication to the Nazi cause. It explained why his warning had come too late, and it set up the second phase of the deception. On June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, Pujol sent the message that would determine whether Fortitude succeeded or failed. His network, he reported, had been able to make an overview of Allied forces in Britain. He claimed 75 divisions were present, significantly more than the actual 50. Most importantly, 11 divisions of Fusag under Patton's command had not participated in the Normandy landings. The message carried an unmistakable implication. Normandy was a diversion. The real invasion, the main Allied thrust with Patton's army group, was still coming at Calais. The Germans had to hold their reserves in place, ready to meet the true threat when it materialized. German intelligence found Pujol's analysis completely credible. It aligned with their expectations and was supported by reports from other agents. More significantly, it gave them an explanation for what had happened that preserved their strategic assumptions. They hadn't been wrong about Calais. They had simply failed to anticipate that the Allies would launch a major diversionary attack first. The German response vindicated every hour spent building Pujol's credibility. Berlin sent a message praising his work. "All reports received in the last week from your network have been confirmed without exception, and are to be described as especially valuable. The Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, German Armed Forces High Command, included 62 of Pujol's reports in their intelligence summaries during the Fortitude period. The strategic impact was decisive. The German 15th Army, positioned to defend Pas-de-Calais, consisted of 19 divisions, including 2 armoured divisions, some of the most powerful forces Germany had available in the West. These units could have been rushed to Normandy to crush the Allied beachhead while it was most vulnerable. Instead, they remained in Calais, waiting for Patton's Phantom Army. Hitler himself, reading the intelligence summaries, remained convinced that Normandy was a feint. On June 9th, he refused Rommel's urgent request to move armoured reserves from Calais to Normandy. The Führer's intuition told him Patton would strike at Calais within days. German forces in Normandy would have to hold with the resources already committed. The Allies had hoped Fortitude might buy them 48 hours before German reserves were committed to Normandy. Instead, the deception held for 7 weeks. Not until July 28th did German High Command finally accept that no second invasion was coming, and begin releasing 15th Army units for commitment in Normandy. By then, it was far too late. Allied forces had broken out of the beachhead. Patton, commanding the very real Third Army that had been quietly moved to France, was already leading the explosive breakout from Normandy that would sweep across France. The German reserves held in Calais by the phantom threat of Fusag were finally released just in time to be destroyed in the Falaise pocket, where Allied forces encircled and annihilated a significant portion of the German army in France. The numbers tell the story of Fortitude's success. In the critical first week after D-Day, when the Allied beachhead was most vulnerable, German forces in Normandy received minimal reinforcements. The 15th Army, which could have been committed in overwhelming strength, sent only token forces. Allied casualties in establishing the beachhead, while still significant, were far lower than pessimistic planning estimates. Military historians have long debated how much credit Fortitude deserves for D-Day's success. The landings faced fierce resistance despite the deception. German defenders fought with skill and determination. The bocage country of Normandy's hedgerows proved brutally difficult terrain that stalled Allied advances for weeks. Perhaps the invasion would have succeeded even without Fortitude's deception. But the alternative scenario is sobering. If Hitler had committed the 15th Army's 19 divisions to Normandy in the first week, if German armoured reserves had counterattacked the beachhead at full strength, the outcome could have been catastrophic. At minimum, Allied casualties would have been vastly higher. At worst, the invasion might have failed, delaying the liberation of Europe by months or years, with implications too terrible to calculate. Operation Fortitude North, the deception targeting Norway, played a supporting but important role. This operation created the fictional British Fourth Army, supposedly headquartered in Edinburgh and preparing to invade Norway from Scotland. The deception relied primarily on fake radio traffic and reports from double agents, since German reconnaissance flights couldn't reach Scotland regularly. Fortitude North exploited Hitler's obsession with Norway. The Führer believed Norway's fjords and ports were essential for German naval operations. He had read and absorbed the strategic theories of Admiral Wolfgang Wegener, who argued that control of Scandinavia was vital for any power seeking to dominate Northern Europe. This intellectual foundation made Hitler particularly vulnerable to suggestions that the Allies would invade Norway. The operation succeeded in keeping 13 German divisions pinned in Norway throughout 1944, forces that might otherwise have reinforced France. British commandos even conducted raids on Norwegian targets in early 1944, creating the impression of reconnaissance in preparation for invasion. These raids, while serving other purposes, added credibility to Fortitude North's fictional threat. The success of Fortitude rested on a foundation that extended far beyond any single deception operation. It represented the culmination of years of British experience in intelligence warfare, going back to the pioneering work of Lieutenant Colonel Dudley Clark in North Africa. Clark had essentially invented modern strategic deception. Working in Cairo, he had created fictional armies, staged fake build-ups, and successfully diverted German attention from actual British operations. His crowning achievement was creating a phantom harbour at Alexandria, complete with dummy ships and fake activity, that drew German bombing raids away from the real naval facilities. Clark understood that effective deception required understanding the enemy's expectations and fears, then feeding them information that confirmed their assumptions while supporting your actual plans. The lessons Clark learned in the desert were refined and expanded for Fortitude. Every element of the deception was designed to support a coherent narrative. Physical evidence like dummy equipment provided visual confirmation, radio traffic created electronic signatures, double agents supplied human intelligence. Each element reinforced the others, creating multiple independent confirmation paths that all led to the same false conclusion. The Allies also benefited from German intelligence failures. Germany's intelligence apparatus was fragmented and competitive. The Abwehr military intelligence competed with the SD, the SS intelligence service, and both competed with the Gestapo and various other Nazi intelligence organizations. This fragmentation meant German intelligence had no effective mechanism for cross-checking sources or identifying coordinated deception. Moreover, German intelligence had been catastrophically penetrated. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of the Abwehr until February 1944, was at minimum ambivalent about Hitler and possibly actively working against the Nazi regime. Whether through deliberate sabotage or simple incompetence, the Abwehr had failed to detect that virtually every agent they believed they had in Britain was actually controlled by MI5. The physical deception elements of Fortitude continued evolving after D-Day. The dummy tanks and landing craft were maintained and even expanded in southeastern England. New units of the fictional Fusag were created as others were supposedly deployed to Normandy. The Phantom Army had to appear to be preparing for its own invasion, even as the real Allied armies fought in France. Allied bombers supported the deception through their targeting choices. For every bomb dropped on transportation targets in Normandy, 2 were dropped in the Pas-de-Calais region. This bombing pattern suggested Allied preparation for operations in the Calais area while serving the legitimate military purpose of disrupting German logistics. The Germans noted the bombing disparity and took it as further evidence that Calais was the real target. On D-Day itself, additional deception operations supported Fortitude. Operation Taxable used RAF aircraft, dropping aluminum foil chaff called Window to create radar signatures simulating a large invasion fleet heading toward Calais. The aircraft flew in precise patterns that mimicked a convoy moving at 8 knots toward the French coast. German radar operators tracking this phantom fleet reported it to headquarters as confirmation of the expected attack. Operation Glimmer performed similar radar deception with aircraft creating phantom fleet signatures northeast of the actual invasion force. Small boats with radar reflectors and electronic warfare equipment sailed toward Calais, adding physical components to the electronic deception. German coastal radar stations tracked what appeared to be multiple invasion forces approaching from different directions. Operation Titanic involved dropping hundreds of dummy parachutists, nicknamed Ruperts, around Caen and other locations away from the actual drop zones. A handful of SS troops jumped with the dummies, using loudspeakers to broadcast recorded battle sounds and create the impression of airborne assaults. This tactical deception dispersed German forces responding to what appeared to be airborne landings across a wide area. Perhaps the most audacious element of Fortitude South involved captured German generals. Hans Kramer, a German officer captured in North Africa, was repatriated to Germany via Sweden as part of a prisoner exchange. British intelligence arranged his route from Wales to London to pass through areas where genuine Allied invasion forces were concentrated. Kramer was deliberately misled about his location, being told he was near Dover in Kent when he was actually elsewhere. He reported seeing massive Allied forces positioned exactly where the deception wanted Germans to believe they were. The use of real generals, like Patton, required constant calibration. After D-Day, Patton's actual Third Army was activated and deployed to France, where he led the spectacular breakout operation. This created a problem for Fortitude. How could Patton command both the Third Army in France and Fusag in England? The solution was brilliant misdirection. German intelligence was fed stories that Patton had been demoted for his indiscretions and given the lesser command of the Third Army as punishment. Fusag, supposedly the premier American formation, was now under Lieutenant General Leslie McNair. When McNair was accidentally killed by American bombs in Normandy on July 24th, the deception seamlessly shifted Fusag command to General John DeWitt. Each transition was documented through radio traffic and agent reports, maintaining the fiction. The Ghost Army, officially known as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, continued operating after Fortitude ended, conducting tactical deceptions throughout the European campaign. These 1,000-odd soldiers, many of them artists and designers in civilian life, perfected the art of impersonating entire divisions. They would move into an area, inflate dummy tanks, broadcast fake radio traffic, and create the impression that a full division had deployed, allowing the real unit to secretly redeploy elsewhere. In Luxembourg, facing a critical shortage of forces, Patton's Third Army used the 23rd to simulate 2 divisions holding defensive positions. The Ghost Army set up inflatable tanks and broadcast tank noises from loudspeakers for 4 nights. The Germans, deceived, avoided attacking through that sector. When real units arrived to fill the line, the Germans still believed they faced the original formations. During the Battle of the Bulge, the 23rd was impersonating the 75th Infantry Division in a supposedly quiet sector when the German offensive crashed through. The Ghost soldiers withdrew rapidly, leaving real units puzzled about why the 75th had vanished. Later, Ghost Army communications specialists created deception traffic that fooled Germans into thinking Patton's 4th and 80th Infantry Divisions were going into reserve when they were actually preparing to relieve Bastogne. The German forces attacking Bastogne got the surprise of their lives, but these later operations, while tactically significant, paled beside Fortitude's strategic achievement. The deception had held through the most critical phase of the war in Europe. Allied forces established their beachhead, built up overwhelming superiority, and began the drive that would carry them to Berlin. After the war, when captured German officers were interrogated about their intelligence assessments, the depth of Fortitude's success became clear. Senior German commanders remained convinced until well after the Normandy breakout that a second invasion was possible. Some German officers later claimed they had doubted the Fusag threat, but contemporary documents tell a different story. The SS intelligence summaries, troop dispositions and command decisions all reflected absolute conviction that Patton's Phantom Army was real. When the truth about Fortitude finally emerged decades after the war, German veterans expressed a mixture of admiration and bitterness. They had been comprehensively deceived, but by an operation of such sophistication that even in retrospect they couldn't identify where the deception began. The radio traffic had been flawless. The agent reports had been consistent and credible. The physical evidence had been convincing. Even the bombing patterns had supported the false narrative. Some German intelligence officers claimed they had suspected the deception, but been overruled by Hitler's certainty. This is almost certainly post-war rationalization. The contemporary evidence shows German intelligence at all levels accepted the Fusag fiction. They saw what they expected to see, and the Allies gave them just enough real intelligence to confirm their expectations while concealing the truth. Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo, received recognition from both sides. The Germans awarded him the Iron Cross Second Class for his supposed services to the Reich. King George VI made him a member of the Order of the British Empire for his actual services to the Allies. He remains one of only 2 people to receive medals from both sides in World War II. After the war, fearing Nazi revenge, Pujol faked his own death and disappeared to Venezuela, where he lived quietly until the 1980s. When a British writer finally tracked him down, Pujol was reluctant to discuss his wartime role. He had never sought glory, only to fight fascism in the way available to him. In 1984, on the 40th anniversary of D-Day, he returned to Europe for the first time in decades, visiting Normandy to pay respects to those who had actually fought on the beaches. The London Controlling Section, which had orchestrated the broader bodyguard deception plan, was quietly disbanded after the war. Most of its records were immediately classified at the highest levels. The full story of Operation Fortitude remained one of Britain's most closely guarded secrets for decades. Even as details of Ultra and Bletchley Park began emerging in the 1970s, the deception operations remained classified. The reasoning was practical. The techniques developed for Fortitude, inflatable equipment, coordinated radio deception, systematic use of double agents, were still militarily valuable. Intelligence services saw no reason to educate potential adversaries about methods that might be used again. Only gradually, as participants aged and the strategic landscape changed beyond recognition, did governments begin declassifying Fortitude materials. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the Ghost Army, was deactivated in 1945. Its members were sworn to secrecy and returned to civilian life. Many went back to careers in art and design, carrying memories of one of the war's strangest assignments. For decades, they couldn't discuss what they'd done. When declassification finally came in 1996, aging veterans could at last share stories that their families had never heard. The scholarly assessment of Fortitude's impact has evolved over decades. Early post-war accounts, limited by classification, barely mentioned the operation. As more information emerged, historians began recognizing it as a significant factor in D-Day's success. Current consensus among military historians places Fortitude among the most effective deception operations ever conducted, though debate continues about precisely how much difference it made to the invasion's outcome. What remains indisputable is that German forces were not positioned to contest the Normandy landings with maximum strength. The 15th Army, 19 divisions strong, sat in Pas-de-Calais for 7 weeks after D-Day, while Allied forces consolidated and expanded their beachhead. Whether this was due entirely to Fortitude or partially to German command failures is almost irrelevant. The deception achieved its objective. It helped ensure that Allied forces landing on June 6, 1944, faced an enemy divided in strength and confused about Allied intentions. The operation demonstrated principles that remain relevant in modern warfare and intelligence operations. Effective deception doesn't require making the enemy believe something completely new. It requires reinforcing what they already believe while adding details that support your actual plans. The most convincing lies are those that align with the target's expectations and preconceptions. Fortitude also showed the value of intelligence integration. The operation succeeded because multiple deception channels, physical, electronic, and human intelligence, all told the same story. No single element would have been sufficient. The inflatable tanks needed radio traffic to give them life. The radio traffic needed agent reports to add human confirmation. The agent reports needed physical evidence to provide verification. The interlocking nature of the deception made it nearly impossible to unravel. Perhaps most importantly, Fortitude demonstrated the decisive advantage that comes from controlling enemy intelligence sources. The double-cross system's success in turning or neutralizing every German agent in Britain meant that Allied intelligence could see exactly what the enemy was seeing and calibrate deception accordingly. This closed intelligence loop, where the Allies fed information to Germany and then read German assessments via Ultra, created conditions for deception that have rarely been replicated. The human element of Fortitude deserves final recognition. Thousands of intelligence officers, radio operators, engineers and soldiers participated in creating and maintaining the deception. Many never knew the full scope of the operation they were supporting. The radio operators transmitting scripted FUSAG traffic didn't know the units they represented were fictional. The soldiers guarding fields of inflatable tanks were told it was for training purposes. The compartmentalization necessary for operational security meant most participants understood only their small piece of a vast puzzle. At the strategic level, the operation required unprecedented cooperation between American and British intelligence services. The natural tensions between allies, the different organizational cultures, the competing national interests all had to be subordinated to the common goal of deceiving Germany about D-Day. That this cooperation worked so smoothly was itself a significant achievement. The physical remnants of Operation Fortitude have largely disappeared. The inflatable tanks were deflated and disposed of after the war, the rubber and canvas recycled. The dummy landing craft rotted in harbours or were broken up for scrap. The temporary buildings erected for German reconnaissance to photograph were demolished. The radio transmitters were reassigned to other duties. Very little physical evidence of the operation survived beyond photographs and documents. What did survive was the impact on military thinking. Fortitude became a case study in staff colleges around the world, analysed for its techniques and principles. Modern military deception doctrine draws heavily on lessons learned from the operation. The integration of physical, electronic and human intelligence channels, the importance of reinforcing enemy preconceptions, the value of controlling information flows, these concepts, proven at Normandy, remain fundamental to contemporary deception operations. Operation Fortitude stands as a testament to the power of information warfare. In an age of industrial combat, where victory seemed to require simply overwhelming material superiority, a carefully orchestrated campaign of deception helped determine the outcome of history's largest amphibious invasion. The Phantom Army that never existed tied down real German divisions that might have thrown Allied forces back into the sea. Klaus Richter, the Luftwaffe photographer who had documented the Phantom invasion force assembling across from Calais, survived the war. In interviews decades later, he expressed no bitterness about having been deceived. The photographs he took were accurate representations of what he saw. That what he saw was an elaborate fiction wasn't his failure, it was the Allies' triumph. The story of Operation Fortitude reminds us that war is not merely a contest of military strength. It is a competition of wills, of intelligence, of innovation. The side that can manipulate the enemy's perceptions, that can make them see what isn't there while hiding what is, possesses an advantage that can be as decisive as any weapon. In the spring and summer of 1944, the Allies wielded that advantage with unprecedented skill, and in doing so, they helped ensure the liberation of Europe and the defeat of Nazi Germany. The invasion that Hitler never saw coming struck Normandy with overwhelming force. The invasion he did see coming, the one he had prepared for, the one commanded by the general he feared most, never came at all. It existed only in radio transmissions, agent reports, and rubber tanks inflated in English fields. But for 7 critical weeks, it was real enough to paralyze German decision-making and help change the course of history. That is the legacy of Operation Fortitude, the greatest Phantom Army ever assembled, the most successful military deception in history, and a testament to the principle that in warfare, perception can matter as much as reality.